Well, we're here at the Pry Field Hospital Museum. This location is part of Antietam National Battlefield, and today it's run as a satellite museum to the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. And the reason why we're here on the Pry House grounds is that not only was this the Union Army's headquarters during the battle, it was also headquarters for the Union Army of the Potomac's medical department under Dr. Jonathan Letterman. And this is really the turning point in the history of American military medicine. This is where it goes from a chaotic response after a battle to becoming an organized and logistical system that transports casualties on the field.
After Manassas and all those problems, how did the medical corps respond to that?
Well, surprisingly, very little was done in the wake of First Manassas to actually improve the medical response. A lot of old guard bureaucrats in Washington were really reluctant to make any significant changes in the system of the Army, especially the medical department. A year after the Battle of First Manassas came the Second Battle of Manassas, which was on nearly the same ground, but with larger armies. Unfortunately, they were using essentially the same systems at that time. The Confederacy had improved their system, realizing that casualties needed to be addressed and that there would be a logistical response required to deal with those casualties, but the Union Army was still just as woefully unprepared with many times more casualties. So they faced the same problem. Now, change came about earlier that summer with Dr. Jonathan Letterman. Letterman came into the position of medical director of the Army of the Potomac right after the Army had suffered a terrible defeat after the 7 Days battles, ending the Peninsula Campaign near Richmond. Letterman's first task was to basically whip the Army back into shape, restore its health, improve its nutrition, actually create some adequate hospital supplies and transport for the Army. But once the Army was back on its feet, he began to completely change the medical system that was in place for battlefield medicine. His first change was to institute a real ambulance corps. Now, prior to Dr. Letterman, there really was no system. There was no ambulance corps that could handle casualties. Following the Battle of General Robert E. Lee moves north into Maryland for the Antietam campaign, and the Union Army is forced to counter that. So they reconsolidate the forces of McClellan from the peninsula, the Army of the Potomac, and those forces that were at Second Manassas, and they create a larger Army of the Potomac. So Letterman is responsible for putting together a medical organization. Unfortunately, he only has a few days in Washington before the Army is forced to move out westward in pursuit of General Lee in Maryland. So he's really working with very little. Most of their medical supplies, including their ambulances, are left on the peninsula when they pull out of there. So he's trying desperately to put things together in Washington to actually create a medical system. Letterman is somewhat successful. He's able to start implementing his ambulance system in those forces that had not been part of his original ambulance plan. He gets ambulance sent from Washington, D.C., and they meet him in Frederick, so he gets some time to start distributing them, but it's not really the organizational system you would hope for when you're about ready to go into the largest battle of your life at that point. On the battlefield here, he begins making some of the changes that he will later become famous for. He will go across the field and start laying out particular locations that will be particularly important for medical operations following the battle. Places that are well suited for hospital sites, large barns like this one, the Pry Barn, that's really their goal because it allows a large operating area, easy access to hay and running water. And he's also looking at evacuation routes and lines on the battlefield. So what's going to be well set up to processing casualties as they come off the battlefield. And that's an innovation as well. He's planning ahead. One of the problems that he's going to have on this battlefield that he will correct is the fact that a lot of medical officers are just attached to the Army in an unorganized fashion, and when the battle erupts and they find themselves in the combat, they'll set up their medical facilities wherever they deem it necessary. But that's not in a very organized system. Problem is that we've got hospitals that are set up impromptu all across the battlefield, and the medical directors don't know where those are. They can't get their supplies to them because they don't know that they need supplies, and they can't run an efficient evacuation system because they don't know where those hospitals have been set, and there's no standard procedure to any of it. Another large problem that Letterman runs into here at Antietam is a lack of medical supplies. The quartermaster department was really responsible for a lot of things that the medical department needed to be doing, and one of those was handling the medical supplies. Before the Battle of Antietam, medical supplies get shortchanged as priority is given to ammunition, foodstuffs, and getting men forward. Medical supplies are often left to the side. So in Frederick at Monocacy Junction, there's a holdup of all the medical supplies there. So when the battle actually happens here at Antietam, they really only have those medical supplies that are immediately on them at that time. People talk about Clara Barton as the angel of the battlefield, and this is one of those times that her presence really did help save a lot of lives. Not so much because of her individual nursing, but because of all of the supplies that she brought to the battlefield. The Civil War is really an innovative time in many respects, and one of those is the birth of what we would now call NGOs, one of those being the United States Sanitary Commission, but also organizations like Clara Barton's, which brought privately purchased and donated medical supplies to the field to help meet the needs. So the bandages, medicines, and most importantly lanterns for night operations that she provided really helped to save a lot of lives here until the Army's medical supplies could catch up with them a few days later.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and share it with your friends. You can also visit www.discerninghistory.com for more videos and other resources.